Yeah, so I'm here again to talk about something a little bit different from the ecosystem functions perspective, moving more onto the services side of things now, particularly onto the cultural, more on the cultural and human nature interaction side of things. So we're looking at the role of biodiversity and human nature interactions. So we know that spending more time in nature is known to create benefits, services to humans. These can be from providing recreational spaces for walking or physical activities through to providing spaces to relax, rejuvenate, or provide educational activities, or simply just provide a satisfying aesthetic experience that we can all enjoy when you see something that just takes the breath away. It does play into the human experience and also into just providing these well-being benefits. But what is it about these spaces that provides these benefits? Is it the shape and texture of the land? Is it the interaction between the landscape and the plants or animals that inhabit it? There's growing evidence to suggest that the aesthetic appeal and rejuvenating qualities of these environments is in fact driven by these plants and animals, not just by the presence of organisms, but the diversity of them can have a substantial positive impact. It's postulated that this may be due in part to humans' evolutionary ability to assess the natural health of an environment, looking and making judgments about whether this is somewhere that we want to live or forage by looking at the diversity or alternatively lack of diversity that might indicate unhealthy environments. And thus it can support human life if it's diverse as theory. Whatever the mechanism, though, the benefits have been observed for grasslands, meadows and woodland and parkland landscapes, but far fewer have ever demonstrated this in coastal marine habitats, despite the fact that substantial populations live near these habitats. It's often reported as well that traditional negative views of many coastal seaweed and animal species, which might actually impact on their ability to provide these positive benefits that we see in terrestrial ecosystems. But understanding how people perceive and interact with nature at the coast is becoming an increasingly important topic, driven in part by accelerating losses of natural coastlines and urban coastlines expanding rapidly, which often reduces the diversity of the seaweeds and the animals along these coastlines. So to try and assess how biodiversity is affecting these different aspects that humans require but get much benefit from, we designed an image-based questionnaire, an online image-based questionnaire with 3 common different structure types. We had riprap walls, stepped concrete walls, and more sorts of heritage-style stone-built walls that you see in many older ports and harbours and marinas. We use between 0 and 8 species in each image, and did this across 120 images at each focal scale. And we also did this across 2 focal scales. We did it at a whole structure scale where you would typically view it if you were walking past it, but also people interact with nature and interact with these structures frequently, going looking for critters and looking for things in between the rocks. So we thought it was important to try and capture those 2 different scales, that close-up intimate viewing scale and those whole landscape scales. We used multiple approaches to try and assess this. We used an paired image where we asked people to pick which image they preferred out of 2 side-by-side images. We also asked them more like-it type approaches for a wide variety of different properties of scenes and also human interactions with them. So we asked them about aesthetic appeal. We asked them about how interesting they found these different structures, and also how much calming potential that they have, and whether they made people feel relaxed or whether they made people feel stressed. We also use free text approaches as well to try and get some of the motivations and some of the underlying motivations people had for feeling one way or another. What we found is that species, a bit like in terrestrial environments, species richness was a really, really strong predictor of the benefit that people were getting, and certainly for the aesthetic scores, which are on the left-hand side here, you can see that as you increase the species richness, you get quite a strong increase in the aesthetic appeal. So we used an ELO approach, a ranking approach, which gives a proprietary score. So the higher the number on the axes, the more preferred each treatment was. We found that the higher the species diversity, the higher the preference was for it. And we saw this as well from the like-it type questions across aesthetic appeal, interest, and calming as well. There was always a positive effect of those increasing diversity. When we started to look at the close-up scale, though, you started to see different things. Well, the same things strengthening, but also then things like functional diversity, other metrics of biodiversity increased in strength as well. So, whereas at the landscape scale, functional diversity, which is just a variety of different traits, so things like shape, size, texture, etc., didn't have a huge amount of effects. But when you start viewing these much closer up, actually, converse to what you would expect, people didn't actually like this. And in fact, we saw decreasing aesthetic appeal as you increase the diversity of these things. We think that's just because you have a kind of, there seems to be a hump-shaped relationship with complexity of a scene and appeal. So you get an increase as you go up to moderate complexity because there's many other things happening. It's more interesting. There's more things going on. But then you hit a point where it becomes overwhelming, and people actually start to disfavour those scenes. Then, and these were strengthened as we got closer at viewing scales. In terms of what was motivating people to feel this way, we used free text and asked them a series of questions. And one of the two most common themes that people came up with as positives and negatives were diverse communities and natural communities, positive drivers, and artificial or things that people perceive to be artificial, more artificial were favoured. And you can see that the perceived benefits of diversity increased with realised species richness. So people were able to perceive that there were more species when there were more species. And it was actually it was a stronger relationship between the perceived diversity and the benefit rather than the actual diversity. But generally speaking, it wasn't linear. And most importantly, despite these negative associations of seaweed and animal species, diversity effects still persisted. So, in summary, species richness was important in providing multiple benefits simultaneously on coastal structures: aesthetic appeal, interest, sense of calm. And these were driven through the perception of diversity and the increases in perceived naturalness that increasing diversity brought. But other dimensions of biodiversity were less important or potentially negative, like functional diversity, as if you had too much diversity in shapes, it actually became perceived as less natural or artificial. It highlights the role that species-rich communities can provide important aesthetic experiences and important well-being benefits in these natural coastal systems, but also if we change the way we're doing things to try and include more of these ecological enhancements, which can provide more naturalistic structures, then that might be able to improve the biodiversity outcomes, but also then the outcomes for well-being and ethics. That's it. I tried to get through it as quick as possible because I know we're running a little bit behind. Anyone got any questions?